I'm a 24 years old, 5 feet 8 inches tall, and around 130 pounds. This story takes place during the summer before my sophomore year in college. I was on a mission to find an affordable place to live near campus. But all the attractive candidates I found were vain of my spending plan. It before long turned out to be clear that I wanted a flatmate to share the least trouble. So I posted an ad on Craigslist explaining my situation and hoping for a response. Surprisingly, in no less than an hour of posting the promotion, I got an answer. It ended up bringing more seasoned woman in her 70s. I had at first expected to room with one more understudy from my colleague. However, I concluded as long as they were able to part these, at least it didn't take many difference much in addition to I hadn't gotten some other reactions over a 1 week from now, so I accepted the open door that came my direction as the school semester started. Mia and I moved into our new residence. She introduced herself as Mia, a short lady with white hair. She was a bit reserved but seemed nice enough. I figured we'd coexist without much trouble, so I wasn't overly concerned about the upcoming months. Anyway, over the course of the following couple of weeks, I seldom saw her. We traded casual banter in the kitchen every now and then, yet she for most part minded her own business, investing all her energy in her room, at times late around evening time. While I was staring at the television in the living room, I would hear piercing laughing coming from her room. At first, I accepted she was on telephone or something. However, I acknowledged I never heard the talking, just chuckling. I was unable to comprehend what she was up to, and that giggle was creepy, resembling in that of a small child, perhaps her daughter. If she had one in her room, things took a bizarre turns as time passed. Mia started coming out of her room just to watch me. She would remain in the kitchen or the foyer quietly noticing me while I started the television or prepared supper. It was startling, and I felt progressively awkward around her. One night, around 3 a.m., I was awakened and by a faint knocking on my bedroom door. It wasn't the type of the knocking meant to get my attention, but slow, soft, and barely audible. I called out Mia's name and the knocking ceased instantly. I was sure it was her because I heard the same giggling followed her footsteps retreating to her room. This incident left me quite rattled since I didn't have a lock on my winterway. Nothing kept her from entering my room. While I was snoozing, I didn't rest until the end of that evening. I had planned to stand up to her about the circumstances the next day. However, she never left her room during the night. Worried for my well-being, I moved my work area before my entryway as a stopgap blockade given my absence of a legitimate lock. It was anything but a secure salon. However, it was everything I could manage. Tragically, that feeling of safety didn't stand the best of time. Long 3 hours after the fact, I was shocked alert by my work area being moved by my room entryway, which somebody was attempting to open. It was Mia. I could see her eye peering through the crack of the slightly open door. Before I could react, she started screaming and banging on my door. My desk began to give way, so I got out of bed and helped the door close myself. The screaming and banging continued for what felt like an unending length of time. When it at long last stopped, I promptly called the police upon their appearance. I carefully opened my room entryway, and what I saw left me frightened. Each and every blade from our kitchen had been pushed into my room entryway, shaking with dread. I clarified the circumstances for 2 officers, and they arrested Mia in her room. 2 weeks later, I moved out of that room and rented a new room for myself. Now, I have to work to get the room rent, but I really don't know what Mia's intention was. I was 29 years old. I'd saved enough money to buy my first house. It wasn't anything special, and honestly, all things considered, it wasn't in the best neighborhood either. I'd met all the near neighbors, and I'd say the first 2 weeks I moved in considering the neighborhood. I was shocked to find they generally appeared to be pleasant. 2 or 3 them even welcomed me over for a supper, and not many times, having lived in various lofts for my entire life. This wasn't something I was utilized to, yet they weren't all similar. A few weeks after I moved in, someone came to my house and started knocking violently. I rushed towards the door and opened it to ask if there was any problem, and I saw that it was an old man of about 55 years old age. Since I opened the door, he stood there silently and kept staring at me. After a second, he pointed at a house which was 2 houses down from where we were standing. He pointed at that, said, "That is where he resided. That was the house that I consistently seen covered with murkiness without fail." However, I didn't ask him anything after that. Each and every other evening, or he would knock at my front entryway at some ridiculous hour, requesting stuff. He would infrequently knock at my entryway, and at the point when I used to open the entryway, he used to stand on the opposite side of the road, gazing at me, and sometimes standing in front of the door quietly or saying some random stuff that I didn't know about. I figure out I don't have to open door every time he came because he was causing trouble for me. Some now I started opening the door to his knocks less and less, but this didn't seem to have any effect on the number of times he would appear quick forward. To a night when something unusual happened, it was simply like one more knock from the area on my entryway. Yet the secret truth behind it planned to stun me until the end of my life. I planned to disregard, as I was used to disregarding those arbitrary knocks by then at that point. Yet as I looked through the peephole, I noticed the guy looked distressed and aggressive. I got scared to see him. I was curious, so I decided to open up the door. I asked him what he required, and what he answered with was not by a stretch the kind of distraction I was expecting. He inquired as to whether I could come over and assist him with a barbecue, which he repurchased a couple of days. Now, this happened around midnight, which in my opinion was an extremely odd time to start grilling. But against my better judgment, I decided I would help him, and I told him that I'd be over in a second, and then I just needed to put some shoes on the hang me and began strolling back. 2 or 3 minutes after the fact, I advanced over to his house. I opened an inner way and strolled into his chairs. It was dim, so it was hard to see, yet it was clear there was no barbecue. On top of that, person was no place inside. In spite of that fact that his secondary passage was wide open, I stuck my hand inside and yelled out for the guy. No one responded, and all of a sudden I heard a muffled response coming from down a set of stairs just left of me. He screamed and called me down there for help. I was hesitant to go down there. There were no lights down there. In fact, there wasn't a single light throughout the whole house. I yelled down the stairs asking him if he could turn on a light so I could see. There was a silence for a few seconds. Eventually, he responded that lights were broken. There I knew something was off that point. I yelled back at him that I was leaving within a moment. After I said this and I was about to turn, I heard footsteps spring up the stairs towards me. My flight reaction kicked in. Immediately, I ran straightforwardly back to my house and locked the entryway. Behind me, I pulled back a bunch of traps and locked out one of my windows, yet I didn't have any idea anything. I was scared. I thought about calling the police, but decided against it, figuring I really wouldn't have the option to demonstrate. Whatever only happened occurred for the following couple of days. I didn't leave my house for anything with the expectations of work during those days. I never saw the person or did any late night thumps. Happened precisely 1 week after it happened. I was talking with my neighbor across the road, and discussion at last arrived on what I experienced and how I was planning to sell my house. because of it, but I was just met with a look of confusion. I was then informed that no one lived in the house I was talking about. It had been abandoned for 2 years. This prompted my neighbor to call the police. However, the police found nothing inside or around the house. I sold my house few weeks later, so that is all. I am now certain of it. Whatever else came from the circumstances or not, I actually don't have the vaguest idea who the person was or what he was attempting to draw me into. I live in a suburban neighborhood surrounding a very different city. Many of the people who lived in my neighborhood are either big business workers, engineers, or medical professionals. I was about 16 at the time the violence began occurring, and my more youthful sibling was still in the center school. I live in a little parkway with other families who had children that were near my age. Straightforwardly across the road carried on with a man. His name was Mark, and he lived with his wife and young daughter. Mark was an engineer for a local company, and he was agreeable for the first year. He lived opposite of. We even welcomed him and his family to our barbecues and neighborhood social events, since at the time he appeared like an ordinary person. Someplace along the line, individuals on our road started to see peculiar things occurring at Mark's home. The lawn was never cut, the pool wasn't cleaned, and his wife and daughter would occasionally leave the house for a long period at a time. We would all see Mark drive off in a sports car, but his family was rarely with him. It turns out Mark had some kind of mental break, and he compromised his significant other with a firearm while he was inherited. And the point when issues like that emerged, his better half and girl would promptly escape there during a freezing cold winter night. I woke up to the sounds of the police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances. Considering I live in a small neighborhood, I rarely see any emergency vehicles in our area. Maybe the occasional cops for a noise complaint from our older neighbors, but that was all there was to it. It occurred around 2 a.m., so I groggily got up and went to my window to see what was happening. My heart quickly sank. Mark had gotten drunk again and deliberately covered himself in a snowbank where and rejected help from specialists. We was, as a whole, felt terrible for Mark since he was such a decent man. When we met him, it seemed like he just snapped. Fast forward to that following summer, Mark's drinking issue had gotten way crazy to the place where he lost his work and permit because of various DVIs. I was home alone watching siblings in the nearby neighborhood on the grounds that both of our folks worked, and my siblings was old bodies with a neighbor's child. Around the lunchtime, a cop pulled up to our house saying that Mark had taken a car, drove it around the neighborhood at alarmingly fast speeds, and was possibly armed. He was arrested for owning unregistered weapons prior. Apparently heard that the cops were coming in light of the fact that so many of our neighbors gripe, so he dumped the vehicle and was last seen meandering through the forest behind my home and the adjoining house. Is my ally for the street. You know that the feeling when you reach in your pocket to track down something and it's not there, that a stomach dropping sensation I had that times 1,000. The cops advised me to promptly call them, assuming I saw him returning to his home, so it seemed like he totally moved away from them. After the cop left, I went to panic mode. I locked all the windows and doors and informed my brother and the neighbor to call their parents and fill them in on the situation since they were still at work. An hour passed and my brother and his friend were just sitting in the living room watching TV, and I was in the dining room, so I could sleep looking out of the window. Eventually, I saw that the trees at the edge of my dad's yard were moving as though somebody was attempting to push through them. I quickly told my sibling and the neighbor to move away from the windows. What's more, remained silent. As soon as I said that, I saw Mark stick his head out of the trees, spot me in the window, and run once more into the forest. I quickly called the police, cracking out, letting them know he was still concealing in frost in my patio. Mark knew what my parents' car looked like, and since they weren't in the carport, he obviously realized that I was home alone. I was feeling better that he was in some measure back in the forest again, yet realizing he was still close was agitating for the hour following my call to the cops. There was no sign of Mark until he appeared in my backyard walking out of the woods. I was freaking out again because only thing between me and Mark was a sliding glass door. I was in the kitchen, so I ducked behind a ledge. I at last looked my head up after a moment and saw that he was simply looking at my entry from around 20 feet away, gazing and not moving. After around 10 minutes, he rushed to the front yard, and that is the point at which I took note that he had something in his pocket. I wasn't precisely certain what it was, nevertheless, he kept his hand near it while going into the cigarette and locking himself back into his carpet. The cops came back since he was back on his property and then had no evidence other than his neighbor's account of him driving through the neighborhood. They really couldn't do anything except give him a warning. It was his word against the neighbors. At that point, years continued and he kept on becoming increasingly more maniacal. He would frequently secure himself in the carpet where he had loaded up enormous propane tanks, and I planned to strike a match which would have totally exploded the spot. Fortunately, the nearby neighbors smelled the gas and they called the police in the local group of the fire right away. They went in wearing full hazardous material suits, furthermore, had the option to recover him from the carpet. After a few years, Mark moved out and no one has heard from him since then. The house is still empty, and if I'm being honest, it's a really scary house. If someone wants to live in that house, he must be told the history of that house.